Harvey was a creature of habit. Every morning, he'd leave his house in Upper East Side. He'd go to Queens. He'd stop at the diner, get breakfast. But that morning, he left the diner around 9 a.m. to get in his car and go to work. And all of a sudden, two people came up to him and pushed him into a car at knife point. Harvey, he said, "Here, take it. Take my money, take my car." But this was not a mugging. They were looking for more.
And he had no clue where he was at that point. And he's thinking, they're going to bury me alive.
So it was around 10 a.m. and Harvey didn't show up to a very important meeting about the future of his company, Lord West. In the 90s, Lord West was the premier men's formal wear company. We're talking about a company that sold 100,000 tuxedos a year to people like Ralph Lauren and Pierre Cardin.
Harvey Weinstein was the tuxedo king of New York.
In New York City, people like to dress up. If you have wealth, you like to show it off. And a lot of socialites and wealthy people, they show them off at galas and various charity events. And if you're at any New York gala, you are likely wearing a Lord West tuxedo.
Even though Harvey had dressed the most elite people in New York, he really kept under the radar.
Harvey was a humble guy. Like he had money. He lived on the Upper East Side, could have rubbed elbows with the rich and famous. But he'd rather eat in a diner in Queens, He was a self-made man, he came up, from a kid from Brooklyn, like me. Although he made a lot more money than I did.
Harvey's goal was to bring everyone around him up with him.
He always was respectful of everyone's opinion and had such integrity and was just a phenomenal mentor. I went on in life, I would think of things in terms of, how would Harvey handle this? What would Harvey say? And I think a lot of people felt the same way about him.
Harvey was a man who believed in giving people second chances. He believed in pulling people up by the bootstrings.
If his workers came to him and needed anything, he was the first person to help them out.
He's just like part of my family. I'm working here with a man for 25 years. He looks out for his workers.
We love that guy. We don't fear him as a boss. He's our friend. I wish everybody else have a bosses like that.
A lot of people credited the success of the company to his leadership style, and he was ready to take it even further.
Harvey had just taken out a $3 million loan, and the company was discussing expansion at that point. So Harvey was 45 minutes late for a very important meeting, which was so unlike him. This is a guy that you could set your watch by, and everybody started to get really scared.
And then his daughter called.
To the meeting, Harvey was supposed to go pick up his daughter, but he didn't make it to the airport. If Harvey said he's going to pick you up, he'd be there. So they became concerned. They just knew something had to happen for him not to be there. So at that point, Several other executives from Lord West went to the diner to ask if he had been there that morning. When they found out he was, everybody in their different cars started spreading out, looking in the area for Harvey's car to see if something had happened, But after an exhaustive search, the executives went back to the family and said they weren't able to find Harvey or the car.
Harvey's family was fully panicked. They knew something bad must have happened to him, and they went straight to the police.
Harvey's family tried to file a missing persons report at the 19th precinct.
But police couldn't file the report.
There was nothing really suspicious other than the fact that he wasn't where he was supposed to be.
48 hours is the normal time that you would start an investigation. The police department can't go out every time they get a phone call that somebody's missing. You get children all the time that go out, play somewhere, they don't come home for 2 hours. So if the missing person squad went out on every call, there'd be no missing person squad.
But Harvey's family was insistent. They knew something was up.
And they were going to do anything they possibly could to get their father back.
So, because they couldn't file the report, they made the call to City Hall.
Harvey was this very unassuming person. But then, on a regular basis, he'd be hitting tennis balls with Mayor Dinkins. They lived in the same neighborhood on the Upper East Side, so they were friends. They knew each other well.
In the early 90s, I would get a daily briefing on crimes. And this was the real deal. He was a prominent businessman. He disappeared in daylight hours. So we definitely marshaled forces and were very much concerned from the get-go.
So I was in my office. I received a phone call from the chief of detectives to go down to missing, let them know that they had this situation, waive the 48-hour protocol. I let them know that we have to find out what the hell is this about. That was the start.
What no one could have known was just how dire Harvey's situation really was.
So you have to understand, Harvey was shackled. He couldn't move. He was terrified, and he just kept asking them, why me? What have I done? And just as Harvey was at his most petrified, they told him, your family has got to pay us $3 million or they will never see you again.
The last person to be missing for 6 minutes, let alone 20 hours, was Harvey Weinstein. Harvey's children, they were besides themselves. They had no answers. This was totally out of character.
We put out an APB on Harvey and his car.
Investigators scoured the city looking for Harvey, and they found nothing.
So investigators started talking to his kids. They wanted to get an idea of Harvey's routine and how he started his day.
The family told the police that Harvey every morning went to the same Queens diner for breakfast.
We went to the diner and canvassed all the employees and folks that might have lingered around the diner.
We interviewed the waitress. We interviewed the manager. They both said that Harvey had been there that morning. He ate, he left, and they didn't see anything. Did you see a scuffle in a parking lot, anything like that? No, we didn't see anything.
We just didn't know what was going on.
So later that night, the police finally got a break. A call had come in from a patrolman out in Queens that saw Harvey's car.
It was recovered in Brooklyn, I believe in the 83rd precinct, which kind of borders Queens.
Investigators inspected the car, and they found something really strange. There were no fingerprints.
It looked like whoever drove it there wiped it clean, like it was waxed, and so all fingerprints were removed from the car.
Just reeks of suspicion. Who would clean a car like that? Unless you did something really bad with it, you know?
They knew that Harvey was in danger, and they knew they had to move really fast. Every second counts in a situation like this.
We're on high alert, but it wasn't considered a kidnapping until the ransom call came in.
That morning, there was a call that came into the factory of Lord West Tuxedo Company. It was a woman with a raspy voice and a foreign accent.
This is the Black Cat organization. We have Harvey Weinstein. We demand $3 million in ransom. We will be in touch.
So now Major Case took over the investigation from missing persons, and that's how we got involved in it.
From that point, we tried doing follow-up to see if there was any information on a Black Cat organization. This is something that, we've never heard of.
We have a unit, a gang unit. We run this name by them. Never heard of it. Then I said reluctantly, call the feds, see if they have anything on it. Never heard of it.
When you think of organizations, it could be anything. Is it a terrorist group? Is it a drug organization? We don't know. All the results were coming back negative.
So while the police were trying to figure out who these people could be, they realized that they had to call Harvey's family and let them know. The most important thing for the police was to keep everything very quiet. The only people who could know were the ones that were closest to Harvey.
They just said, Harvey's been kidnapped, and we're praying that he's okay. He was like a grandfather. We tried to hold that out, that they wouldn't do something that stupid as to harm him, But we didn't know. We didn't know.
When you deal with a case like this, you're just trying to get your victim back as safe as possible, as quickly as possible. Time is not on your side.
But there was one thing that really stuck out in investigators' minds, and it was something that the kidnappers had said.
The woman on the phone was requesting $3 million in cash.
The management of Lloyd West knew he got the loan, $3 million in cash.
And it seemed like it was more than just a coincidence.
We started looking at this company where he worked.
These people have access to Harvey Weinstein. They see him on a daily basis.
As the investigation began, detectives realized that they had to tread really lightly here because the stakes were very high. Only the top people at Lord West even knew that an investigation was taking place.
We took every single person's name and did a criminal background check on them. We checked who would know that there was that amount of money available at that time of year. Who was missing that day? Who was not at work?
But a look at the records revealed that everybody from the boardroom to the factory had punched in that morning.
There was nothing of any significance found.
As detectives were digging for clues at Lord West, They had no idea that Harvey was just 5 miles away, buried underground. Harvey had been without food and water for 2 days, and he had to be thinking that he's been left for dead. And suddenly, he sees light. The hole opens up.
Now, it wasn't a lot of food, but it was something.
Harvey's instincts kicked in because he was a former Marine. That being in the hole was like being in the trenches again.
Supplies are unloaded and moved up. Invasion moves inland through the swamps.
Harvey, when he became 18, he joined the Marines, and next thing you know, he was on the sands of Iwo Jima, fighting for our country in World War II. And he was very proud of that fact.
He knew he had to keep his wits about him if he was going to survive.
He knew with his training that the banana would go bad first, so he had to eat that first. Then he could always save the apple. And he would have to really ration that water.
With his first bit of energy in days, Harvey got an idea. He had one chance at freedom, one chance to get out, and Harvey was going to take that chance
Harvey did everything he could, but all he had to eat was a banana and some water. He was 68 years old. Harvey didn't have the strength to push a 125-pound piece of metal. His mind was probably playing tricks on him at that point. Harvey was lying in a dark hole. He had no way out. And the only thing that was keeping him from really losing his mind is thinking about the possibility that he could be rescued.
In 1993, we had close to 2,000 murders in this city. For us, at the Post, we were doing like 5, 6 a day. One of the main reasons was the crack epidemic then and people fighting for turf. You know, it was a totally different city back then.
Kidnappings were up because they were drug-related. Now, this was our 26th kidnapping of the year. And this is only August.
A task force was put together to investigate the kidnapping.
We had a team of detectives round the clock at Harvey's residence, just in case the perpetrators tried to communicate with the family. And we could interpret and hand out the information immediately to all the detectives and everyone working on the case.
Investigators had to keep a low profile. They had to make sure that the kidnappers didn't realize that they were looking into the case. The first rule the kidnappers had given the family is not to contact the police.
For the first couple of days, we were on standby, waiting for a lead to come in, waiting for something to follow up on.
Harvey's family had no control over whether their father lived or died. And that's a terrible place to be.
Hello? This is the Black Cat organization. We demand $3 million in ransom, $2 million in $100 bills, and $1 million in $50 bills.
Finally, after days of no phone calls, the family catches a break. The same woman called them and said, head to the West Side Highway with the cash and someone will meet you.
It's up to the family if they want to pay the money. We always tell them, you're better off doing a dummy drop. We'll cut up newspapers, we'll make it look like dollar bills. The family said, we are willing to let this money go. All we want is our father back. 1 million in 50s, 2 million in hundreds. It was 86 pounds. It's the most money I ever had, ever.
Over the next couple of hours, Harvey's son prepared to meet at this location, and the cops were going to follow.
We had 4 or 5 unmarked cars on him, nondescript vehicles. You know, we didn't need him getting kidnapped also.
So Harvey's son got to the location with the cash.
And he waited.
And he waited.
And he kept waiting.
But they never showed up.
And that was the first of many frustrating calls with the Black Cat organization. Over the next several days, the kidnappers called and they gave locations for the family to meet them. And for whatever reason, they didn't show up.
We're starting to think, are these guys playing with us? We just didn't know.
We were doing 16-hour days. Normally, things that didn't bother me started to bother me. So the pressure started to get to you.
So now it was 6 days in, and investigators knew one false move could blow this whole thing up. It's the only good thing was that nobody knew about the investigation. It was still covert.
If the story got out there, it could be just a kiss of death. The kidnappers could just say that rather than collect the money, we just leave him where he is.
And nobody knew about it. Not the kidnappers, not the media, no one. Until Larry.
In 1993, I was a police reporter for the New York Post working out of police headquarters. I would cover everything that would come in on the overnights and start out in the morning. That morning, rode up in the elevator to the major case office. And I was pretty friendly with a lot of people, from the boss on down to the person that answered the phone. So I walked in there, and everybody's face, went white. Everybody was, quiet. I knew there was something up. Then I just started asking around. By early the next day, I had Harvey's name, who he was.
So this story has New York Post written all over it. You have a wealthy businessman kidnapped in broad daylight, and there's a $3 million ransom. It's the type of story that you only come across once or twice in your lifetime, if that.
So now I went back to find out what was going on.
Larry showed up. He says, hey, you're running a kidnapping on some guy named Weinstein? I looked, I said, Larry, you print that, you're going to get the man killed.
I knew it was a big story. I mean, to not run the story, it goes against your instincts. But we did a story. Harvey's life, would be in jeopardy. I just found out that Harvey Weinstein was kidnapped and he was being held for $3 million ransom.
Whether we were going to write about Harvey's kidnapping was a very important decision. As journalists, you're taught the first thing that you should do is make sure that you inform the public.
But if we did a story, someone could get killed. So we made the decision we weren't going to do it.
We were just grateful.
Yeah, for that, we were very appreciative.
I said to Larry, you're going to get the exclusive.
Larry was guaranteed that he'd get the first shot once we knew that everybody was safe and sound, if that day came.
While Larry continued to monitor the story from the sidelines, the calls kept coming in to the family.
So Harvey's family was very concerned. They wanted to know if these kidnappers were just stringing them along.
Certainly in the back of their minds, they knew that their father could no longer be alive.
So that's when we asked the kidnappers for proof of life.
We're, holding our breath.
Hello? Dad. He said he was okay and that the family should deliver the money.
When Harvey's family finally got the phone call from Harvey, they were elated because they knew at that point he was alive. But they didn't know for how much longer. Harvey did not sound like himself. They could tell from his voice that he had been through a really traumatic situation, and it terrified them. So Harvey's family and the police waited nearly 2 days for a phone call.
It had to be around 2, 3 in the morning. They gave us a location to go to, which was right by a park.
Hello?
Harvey's son drove up to the location with the bags in the car.
And all of a sudden, a station wagon came by. This guy walks up to Harvey's son, tells him Black Cat organization, and he put one bag in the station wagon. He took the other bag and he walked into the park. About 15, 20 minutes later, this individual walks out of the park and he got on the phone and he said, "I've got it all, pick me up." And the same station wagon came and picked them up.
The police kept an eye on the station wagon, but they were staying back because they didn't want to do anything to scare the kidnappers into harming Harvey if he was still alive.
And I can hear the guy saying, "I got him, he's at 174. Then you'd hear another car say, "I got him at 168.
Police tailed the car from a distance, keeping out of sight until the 3-hour mark.
It was 3 hours, 10 minutes. I looked on my watch and I said, "Take the car." And then it became a chase.
Police tailed the car, flying up the West Side Highway until it pulled over.
So we stopped at the old Polo Grounds where the New York Giants baseball team used to have their stadium. And there's some catacombs there. The individual ran into the catacombs and we went in after him.
Finally, they hit a dead end.
The perpetrator was taken into custody.
And it turned out that Harvey knew the suspect really well.
His name was Furman Rodriguez. He was an employee of Lord West Tuxedo Company.
Furman was a sewing machine operator at Harvey's company. The license plates from the station wagon turned out to be registered to Furman's apartment on 110th Street And so police were hoping that that's where Harvey would be.
So they did an exhaustive search of the apartment. No Harvey.
But they did find other evidence.
Those teams recovered the bag of money that was taken from the scene, and they had it in a bathtub.
And as the police were going through Furman's apartment looking for evidence, he was already being questioned downtown. The police had taken him to their headquarters at One Police Plaza.
We knew that time was of the essence, and our only connection to the victim at this point was Furman Rodriguez. So I needed to create some sort of a rapport with this individual. So it started out slowly, just trying to get general information. And there was something about this guy. I mean, this guy was just able to lie without really any effort. And that's not easy to do. Usually when you lie and you want to build more lies on top of that, you get caught in a corner and you have to back out of it. This guy just spun a web. He had the knack, he had the gift to just keep going. After a couple of hours, he came out with a story that I thought was a lie. It was just very hard to believe.
I'm okay. We have a hole.
So Furman told Detective Santiago that Harvey was in a hole up along the West Side Highway.
We have him in a hole.
I just didn't understand what he was trying to say, that he's being held in a hole. That just didn't make any sense to me. But he kept repeating himself.
He's in a hole.
And finally, we decided to say, well, if what you're really saying is true, we want you to bring us there. Show us where this is so that we can get him. So he drove us to an area around the West Side Highway and 158th Street in Manhattan. And when you get to that area, there's a service road. And I say, now what? Where's this hole?
We had to walk about a half mile, and then you had to cross the railroad tracks, and then there was another fence. While I was so wiped out, I didn't have the ability to climb the fence. So I stayed down below with Furman.
You know, it was a steep incline. We climbed up the hill. It's a wooded area. You can hear the cars going by. I figured maybe there'd be a small structure up there, maybe an old shed. But as we're there, we're looking around, there's nothing like that. It's just trees, rocks.
Harvey! Can you hear us?
And we just decided to start calling out the name Harvey.
Harvey! 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 Harvey!
I thought Furman at this point was sending us on a wild goose chase.
Harvey!
I'd said to myself, when I retire, I don't want to ask myself, whatever happened to Harvey Weinstein? So, you know.
Harvey! Harvey!
He's not here. It's over.
We heard a little murmur. We heard something.
Harvey!
So we followed to the area where the voice was coming from. And on the ground, there was a metal slab, some planks of wood. We just cleared that out of the way, and we lift the metal slab that was on top of what was covering this hole. And we saw Harvey. And it was just a great surprise. I mean, it was unbelievable.
When we opened up the hole and the sunlight hit his face, it was just an expression that I've never experienced before.
And one of the first things he did was just take in the fresh air. He just needed to breathe the air. And as he breathed the air, he looked up at the sky, at the light, and you could just see the joy in his face.
Oh, it was joy and jubilation. I mean, it's just amazing. You know, that,
Harvey standing on level ground, breathing fresh air, and then the first thing he asked for is,
could I have a cigarette? We just knew that was typical Harvey. And he still had his sense of humor, right? After all of that. Amazing.
I'm telling you, I wouldn't have survived that. There's no way I would have survived that. Sitting in a hole for 13 days, I wouldn't have survived that. I'd have been a babbling idiot when you took me out.
So Harvey was taken to the hospital where the doctors did a complete examination of him, found out he was a very healthy man, even though he didn't eat in the last 2 weeks.
We were ecstatic, you know. I'll tell you, I drove home that night. I was breaking up all the way home. I had to pull off the side of the road a couple of times just to clear my eyes.
So at that point, you know, Commissioner Kelly lived up to his deal. And I talked to Harvey that night in his home.
I feel great. Not good, I feel great.
Can you at least just tell us how you made it for so long?
United States Marine Corps, 50 years ago, buddy.
Because I was in the Marine Corps, I talked to him a little bit about that, and he just seemed to have no lasting effect from being held for 13 days. So just a remarkable case.
It's said that events don't make the man, they reveal him. And I think that's precisely what happened in the case of Harvey Weinstein. He shows the true grit of a true New Yorker.
Different type of person. How many people could be in that situation and come out the way they went in, you might say?
I'm so proud of our police department and to the media, the New York Post in particular, who may have known something of this, but we're mindful of the need to have secrecy so that we would increase the chances of producing the Harvey in one piece.
The hand that grabbed mine. Through this little aperture that he had pulled, I knew I was home. I knew I was safe. And I knew God had smiled down on me.
So over the next several days, investigators were able to question Furman, and they got a full confession out of him.
There was a rumor going through that the company was in trouble, needed a loan, and Harvey had got it.
Furman Rodriguez recruited a couple of his friends to come and abduct Harvey Weinstein.
Meanwhile, Furman's friend Orlina Leonore was the person who was making the phone calls for the Black Cat organization, and it turns out that was just a name that Furman randomly picked out.
I don't think he really thought of the consequences. He probably thought that he can get money from the family and just run off and live his life.
Furman's brother Antonio wasn't sent to trial. He was instead sent to an asylum. He was sent to Ward's Island.
I think it probably really rocked Harvey's world to think that this was an inside situation, you know, so it's hard to take.
What do you think of those guys who did this?
That hurt more than anything, that it was one of my own people. I felt so betrayed by that.
Mr. Weinstein, have you sold the rights to your story yet?
No,
You had a lot of offers?
I can't discuss that. I want to retreat back to who I really am. Anonymous Harvey Weinstein.
Thank you.
So eventually, Harvey had a few meals, gained a few pounds, and then that Monday, he went back to work.
It looked like he'd been in the hole for 14 days. He looked a little rough around the edges, but he still had that sparkle. He still had that drag.
I was very inspired by his will to live. You know, think about 12 days in solitary. I mean, beyond solitary.
It was amazing. He was an extraordinary person. So, I mean, the man was a survivor.
Huh? I'll be here tomorrow.
For a full day?